The warm mild night was colder than usual. Rain hit the metal roofs of the small colony like 1,000 tiny hammers. The colony was not a rich place. It was far from the shining centers of the galaxy. Here, people struggled every single day, and in the middle of this harsh world lived a young mechanic named Ethan. Ethan's life was not easy. He worked long hours in a small workshop near the space docks. He fixed broken ships for travelers who could not pay much. Sometimes they gave him credits, sometimes old tools, sometimes just a thank you. Most nights he went to sleep hungry. But even in his poverty, Ethan kept a small fire of kindness alive in his heart. That night, after finishing his work, Ethan sat down with a small metal bowl. Inside was a simple meal, warm soup made from dried greens and a little spice. It was not much, but it was all he had for the night. He looked at the steam rising and thought to himself that maybe tomorrow would be better. Then he heard it, a soft sound, almost lost in the rain. At first, Ethan thought it was the wind moving through the broken panels outside. But then he heard it again, a faint cry, weak and desperate. He stood up, holding the ball close, and walked to the door of his workshop. Outside, the storm raged. Water ran down the dirty streets, and the light poles flickered. And there, near the shadow of a broken cargo crate, he saw them, two small girls. They were thin, their clothes torn and wet, their faces pale with hunger. They looked no older than 10, maybe younger. One held the other's hand tightly, as if afraid the storm might take her away. Ethan froze. He knew this colony. He knew that orphans here rarely lived long. People had no time to care for strangers. Everyone was too busy fighting for their own survival. But the eyes of those girls cut into him like a blade, eyes full of hunger and fear. The older one whispered something, her voice shaking. Please, food. It was a sound so soft it almost broke Ethan's heart. He looked at the ball in his hand. It was the only food he had for the night. His stomach growled, reminding him of his own hunger. But then he looked at them again, and he made his choice without a word. Ethan walked forward and held out the bowl. The younger girl stepped back in fear, but the older one pushed her gently. The smell of the warm soup reached them, and their eyes grew wide. Ethan knelt down and placed the bowl in their hands. Eat, he said simply, his voice calm but firm. The girls looked at each other, unsure if it was real. Then, slowly, they ate. First small sips, then faster, their hands shaking as they brought the spoon to their lips. Ethan watched them in silence. He felt the cold biting at him. He felt his own hunger burning. But he also felt something else, something warm deep inside. For a few minutes, he forgot about himself. He only saw the children fighting against the cruel night and winning. When the bowl was empty, the younger girl's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice trembling but clear. The older one nodded, her lips shaking as if she wanted to say more but could not. Before Ethan could speak again, lightning cracked across the sky. The girls pulled each other into the shadows and disappeared into the storm. Ethan stood there for a long moment. The rain washed over him, the bowl empty in his hand. He wanted to call them back, to ask their names, to tell them they were safe here. But they were gone, swallowed by the night. He returned inside, his stomach growled louder than ever. He sat on the floor, holding the empty bowl, wondering if he had done the right thing. He had nothing left to eat, no credits until the next week. But when he closed his eyes, he saw their faces. And in that moment, despite his hunger, he felt stronger. The storm raged until morning. Ethan worked the next day as usual, his body weak, but his heart steady. The two girls never returned. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years, sometimes. When Ethan walked through the colony streets, he thought he saw their faces in the crowd, but it was always someone else. And slowly, the memory of that night became just another story locked inside his heart. He did not know the truth. He did not know that his single act of kindness had changed the course of destiny. That the two little girls would one day rise to the stars, and that 10 years later, A luxury spaceship would return to his door. But for now, he was only a poor mechanic, and on that stormy night, he had given away his only meal, not knowing he had fed the future. Asterisk the passing years and years is a long time in the galaxy. Stars burn brighter, wars begin and end, and whole colonies rise and fall. But in one corner of space, on a dusty forgotten world, Ethan still lived. He was no longer the young man who had given away his meal on that stormy night. Now he was older, his hands rough with scars, his back bent from long hours of work. The workshop had not grown, but Ethan's skill had. Travelers who passed through the colony knew his name. If your ship was broken, if your engine refused to start, if your shields flickered, Ethan could fix it, sometimes with new parts, sometimes with old scraps. He could make a ship fly again when others said it was impossible. Yet, even with his gift, Ethan remained poor. The colony was too far from the trade lanes, and most captains who came here were desperate, not rich. But Ethan did not complain. He woke before the suns rose, worked until they set. At night he would sit alone, eating whatever little he had. The only light was the glow of broken circuits on his workbench. And sometimes, when the wind howled across the metal roofs, he remembered. He remembered the faces of the two orphan girls. He never knew their names, never knew what became of them. But those eyes haunted him even in dreams. The colony around him changed slowly. The streets became rougher, the people harder. Rumors spread of pirates growing stronger, of governments pulling away. Sometimes new soldiers came through, demanding taxes nobody could pay. Sometimes strange ships appeared in the skies, ships with banners nobody recognized. Whispers filled the taverns. A new power is rising somewhere out there, something big. But for Ethan, such talk was distant thunder. He kept his head down, focused on bolts and engines, living one day at a time, yet life had its cruel way of testing him. One evening, a captain came into his workshop with a wounded arm. Behind him were two armed guards, their eyes cold. The captain slammed a bag of credits on the table. "Fix my ship by morning," he ordered. Ethan opened the bag and froze. The credits were real but stained with blood. He knew this man was no trader, no explorer. He was a pirate. And the guards with him were killers. Fear filled Ethan's chest. But he nodded, saying nothing. That night, as he worked on the pirate's ship, he heard something, the same kind of sound he had heard 10 years ago, a whisper, a cry, a plea for help. He followed the sound to the cargo hold. There he found a cage. Inside it, 2 children, weak and hungry. They were not the same girls from his past. But the memory cut into him like fire. For a long moment, Ethan stood frozen, torn between fear and anger. Then the pirate captain's voice echoed across the dock, and Ethan stepped back, his fists tight. He could not fight them. Not alone, not yet. The next morning, the pirate left, his ship repaired. The cage was gone, the children gone with it. Ethan sat in silence, his stomach sick with helplessness. And again, he asked himself the question he had asked a decade ago: what is the worth of kindness? In a cruel galaxy, still, even in his doubt, Ethan kept that fire alive. He shared food with a beggar when he could. He repaired the ship of a widow for free. He helped a lost traveler find his way. Small acts. Tiny things, but things that mattered. The world called him a fool. But Ethan refused to let the galaxy harden him completely. Years passed like dust in the wind. Ethan grew older, but his spirit remained unbroken. The memory of the girls was now like a scar, sometimes painful, sometimes almost forgotten. But deep inside, he hoped they had found a better fate than most. Perhaps they had been taken to another world. Perhaps someone kinder had saved them. He never guessed the truth that they were not only alive, but rising higher than he could imagine. And then, on one quiet evening, as Ethan sat at his workbench fixing a broken circuit, the ground shook. The sound was like thunder, but heavier, deeper. Tools fell from the shelves. The lights flickered. Ethan rushed outside, his heart pounding. Across the skies, clouds split apart, lit with fire, and there, descending from the heavens, was something he had never seen before. A ship, massive and gleaming, unlike any craft that had ever touched this colony. Its surface glowed with lines of silver and gold. Engines purred like a living creature. Steady and powerful, people gathered in the streets, their mouths open in awe. Children pointed, old men whispered, and women gasped. A luxury starship, the kind only the richest empires owned, was landing at Ethan's door. He stood frozen, oil on his hands, his shirt dirty with dust. The great ship lowered itself slowly, perfectly, until its shadow swallowed his workshop. The air hummed with energy. The ground trembled. The crowd whispered behind him, "Why here? Who is it for?" And Ethan, without knowing why, felt a strange shiver run down his spine. The ship's ramp began to lower. Slowly, like the opening of a secret, a white light spilled out, cutting through the darkness of the colony night. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what waited beyond that light. But deep inside, a memory stirred, the memory of two hungry faces, two pairs of eyes in the storm. And he felt the past rushing back to meet him. The Airvolt ship stood above the colony like a silent mountain of metal. Its surface reflected the dim lights of the broken streets, making the entire place glow. For a world used to rusted freighters and half-dead cargo ships, this was something out of a dream. No one had ever seen such a craft here. Not even once. It was too perfect, too rich, too alive with power. Children ran from their homes, their bare feet splashing through puddles. Merchants left their stalls. Soldiers abandoned their patrols. Everyone gathered in the open square near Ethan's workshop. The colony had never been united in one place, not like this. But now they stood together, all eyes staring at the giant vessel. The air smelled different. It was filled with the scent of heated metal, polished alloys, and something almost sweet. The engines hummed with a sound that was not loud, but deep. It touched the bones of every person standing there, even the oldest men, who had lived through wars and seen many ships, shook their heads in disbelief. Ethan stood frozen in front of his workshop. The shadow of the ship covered him completely. His dirty clothes, his oil-stained hands, his tired eyes, all of it felt smaller under the weight of that sight. He tried to step back, but his legs refused to move. Something inside him whispered that this was not just a random visit. The ship was here for him. The ramp of the ship began to lower. A deep hiss filled the air as sealed metal unlocked. The people gasped and stepped back. A line of white light split across the ramp and grew wider. It was blinding, pure, not like the yellow lamps of the colony. It was the light of wealth, of power, of worlds far greater than theirs. Ethan raised his hand to shield his eyes. Inside that light, shadows began to move. Figures walked forward slowly, their steps steady and confident. The crowd held its breath, silence falling over the square. No one spoke. No one dared. The first figure appeared tall, wearing a uniform of deep blue with golden edges. The cloth shimmered like liquid under the strange light. Behind this figure came another, and another, each one in perfect order. They carried no weapons, yet their presence felt heavier than any army. Their faces were calm, their eyes sharp. They looked at the colony as if it were something fragile, something beneath them. Then, from the center of the light, two smaller figures walked forward, not small in height, but different in order. The guards round them bowed slightly, heads lowered in respect. The crowd gasped again. Clearly, these two were not ordinary passengers. They were leaders, maybe royalty, maybe something higher. Ethan's heart pounded so hard it hurt. He could not explain why, but something about them felt familiar. Their walk, the way they stood close to each other, the way one moved half a step ahead to protect the other. It was like watching a memory he had buried deep inside come alive again. The two figures reached the end of the ramp. The light behind them dimmed, allowing their faces to be seen. Gasps broke through the crowd, whispers rising. They were young women, no older than 20, their hair tied back, their uniforms carrying the same deep blue and gold. Their eyes burned like stars, strong, unafraid, yet filled with something more, something human. Ethan stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat. He knew those eyes. He had seen them once before. Filled not with power, but with hunger and fear. He had seen them in the rain. On that night 10 years ago, he had fed those eyes, warmed them, given them a chance to live, and now, here they were, standing before him like rulers of the stars. The crowd did not understand. They whispered to each other, "Who are they? Why are they here? Why did they land in this broken place?" But Ethan did not hear them. All he could hear was the sound of his own memory crashing back. The two women stepped forward, their eyes fixed on Ethan, not on the crowd, not on the soldiers, not on anyone else, only him. The older one raised her hand, and the guards immediately stopped behind her. She looked at Ethan, and her lips curved into the smallest of smiles, not the smile of a stranger, but the smile of someone who had once been saved. Ethan's knees felt weak. He gripped the side of his workbench to hold himself steady. His mind raced with questions. Why were they here? How did they find him? What had they become in these 10 years? And most of all, what did they want from him now? The younger one took a step closer, her eyes shining in the light. Her voice rang across the square, clear and strong. "Ethan," she said, and the sound of his name from her lips froze the entire crowd. Nobody in the colony had ever seen strangers call a poor mechanic by name, and in that moment, every whisper stopped, every breath paused, because it was clear this entire ship, this entire display of power, had come here for him. Ethan could not speak. He stood in silence, the weight of the past and the future pressing down on him, and as the crowd waited, holding their breath, he realized one truth. The choice he had made 10 years ago had returned to him, and the galaxy itself seemed to be standing at his door, waiting for what came next. Asterisk. The reunion silence round the square felt heavier than the ship itself. The colony, usually filled with noise and chaos, had become a place where even the wind refused to move. All eyes were on Ethan and the two women standing before him. The poor mechanic, who had spent his life in shadows, was now the center of every gaze, and the two women, dressed in uniforms of power and grace, stared at him with eyes that burned. With memory, the older sister stepped down from the ramp first. Her boots touched the dirt of the colony as if it was holy ground. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at the broken houses. Her eyes never left Ethan. For 10 years she had carried his face in her mind, and now, at last, she saw him again, older, more tired, but unmistakably the same man. The younger sister followed, her movements softer, but just as firm. Her hand brushed the other's arm, as if reminding her they were not alone in this moment. Together, they walked across the square, the guards behind them holding their distance. The crowd parted like water before them, whispers echoing. Some thought they were queens. Others thought they were angels. But Ethan knew better. He knew the truth. They were the two little girls he had fed under the storm. His throat went dry. His body wanted to move, to step back, but his heart locked him in place. The younger sister stopped first, only a few steps away from him. Her eyes softened. Her lips trembled. "Do you remember us?" she whispered, her voice carrying across the silent square. The question stabbed into Ethan like lightning. His mind raced back to that night, the storm, the empty bowl, the desperate eyes. He felt it all over again. His chest ached as he looked at them now, tall and strong, leaders of something far greater than he could imagine. Yet in his memory, they were still two children clutching each other in the rain. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice cracked, the words lost before they could form. The older sister stepped closer, her uniform catching the glow of the ship's lights. Her voice was stronger, yet filled with warmth. "You gave us food when we had nothing. You gave us hope when the world turned away. You saved our lives." The crowd gasped. People turned to each other in shock. This poor mechanic, who had never left the colony, who lived in dirt and rust, had once saved the lives of women who now commanded such power. The whispers grew. Is it true? Did Ethan really do that? But the sisters ignored the crowd, their focus only on him. The younger sister reached out, her hand trembling slightly. She touched his scarred hand, the hand that had once given her that bowl. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in years, Ethan saw not a leader, not a commander, but the same frightened child who had whispered please. Food in the storm. Ethan's chest grew heavy, his voice low. I never thought I'd see you again, he whispered. The older sister nodded slowly, her eyes sharp, but wet with emotion. We never forgot, she said. Not a single day, not a single night, not a single star we crossed. We remembered the man who gave us life when he had almost nothing left himself. The crowd fell into silence again. Even the hardest merchants, even the soldiers with cold eyes, felt something stir in their hearts. Because in this broken colony where kindness was rare, they now saw the proof of what it could create. The sisters did not bow in grand ceremony. They did something far greater. They lowered themselves to their knees before Ethan. Gasps exploded through the crowd. Royalty, warriors, whatever they were, kneeling before a poor mechanic was something no one had ever imagined. Their heads bowed low, their voices steady and united. To you, we owe everything. Ethan stepped back, his heart hammering. He did not feel like a savior. He did not feel like a hero. He was just a man who had once given away his meal. But here they were, proving that the smallest act could ripple through the stars. And in that moment, Ethan's eyes filled with tears he could no longer hide. The older sister looked up at him, her face shining in the light. We built this ship. We fought for freedom. We united fleets. But none of it would exist without you, Ethan. The younger one nodded, her voice breaking. You gave us a future. Now we have returned to give you one. The words hit Ethan harder than any storm. The crowd stared, silent, frozen, waiting for what he would say. But Ethan could not speak. His heart was too full, his voice too weak. And for the first time in his life, the man who had lived in shadows found himself standing in the light of destiny. The galaxy had remembered him. The two little girls had returned, not as orphans, but as leaders, and the reunion, born from one simple meal, now echoed like a legend in the making. Asterisk. The revelation crowd stood frozen, the air heavy with silence. The two sisters still knelt before Ethan, their uniforms stained with dust from the colony ground. The poor mechanic who had given them a meal now stared at them in disbelief. It felt unreal, like a dream born from hunger and loneliness. But then the older sister rose slowly, her eyes sharp with fire. Ethan, she said, you deserve to know the truth. The younger sister stood beside her, her voice softer but steady. 10 years ago, after you fed us, we ran into the storm, thinking we would not live to see another sunrise. But fate had other plans. The crowd leaned in, listening with hungry ears. Even the soldiers who once looked bored now stood stiff. The tale of these women was no longer just their own. It was a story that belonged to the galaxy. The older sister raised her hand, as if painting the memory in the air. We were found that night by a passing scout ship, a vessel from the Outer Alliance. They saw 2 children dying in the rain and took us aboard. At first, we thought it was luck, but later we understood it was destiny, because without the strength you gave us, we would not have survived long enough to be rescued. Her words struck Ethan deep. He remembered the empty bowl in his hands, his hunger gnawing at him. He had thought it was a small choice, forgotten in time, but here it was, alive, reshaped into something greater. The younger sister stepped forward, her voice breaking with emotion. They raised us, taught us, gave us food and shelter. But what we carried inside, Ethan, was the memory of you. Every time we felt weak, we remembered the poor mechanic who gave us his only meal. Every time we wanted to quit, we asked ourselves what would Ethan have done, and the answer was always the same. He would give, he would fight, he would endure. The crowd gasped, Some clutched their chests, some shook their heads in disbelief. For years they had mocked Ethan for being too soft, too kind in a cruel world. And now they heard the truth. His kindness had shaped warriors who now commanded fleets. The older sister's voice grew harder, sharper. The galaxy was breaking, pirates rising, governments falling. We were trained to fight, to lead, and we did. We rose through the ranks, not because of our names, not because of blood, but because we carried your gift. The fire you gave us spread to others, until men and women followed us into battles they should have lost. And they won, Ethan. They won because of the lesson you gave us. That kindness is stronger than fear. The younger one placed her hand on her chest, her eyes wet. We built this ship, not as a throne for ourselves, but as a promise that one day we would return to you. We wanted the man who gave us life to see what became of it. We wanted you to know. Ethan, you did not just save two children that night, you saved a future. The words echoed like thunder across the square. Ethan's knees felt weak, his chest tight. He had spent years believing his life meant nothing. He had worked in shadows, starving, struggling, forgotten by the world, and now, before the eyes of his entire colony, he learned he had been the spark for something vast, something legendary. The crowd erupted in whispers. Ethan saved them. He gave them food. He made them who they are. The people who once ignored him now looked at him with awe. Mothers pointed him out to their children. Men nodded with respect. In one night, Ethan had gone from a nameless mechanic to the man who shaped leaders of the stars. The older sister took a step closer, her voice softer now. Ethan, you think you are ordinary, but to us, you are the reason we stand here. We carry fleets at our command, but the fleet we truly follow is the one you built in our hearts. The younger one added, her eyes locked on his. You may see yourself as a poor mechanic, but to us, you are the father of our destiny. And now we have returned, not only to thank you, but to change your life as you changed ours. Ethan felt tears on his face. He tried to speak, but no words came. His hand shook as he reached out. The sisters stepped forward, and for a moment, the three of them stood together, their shadows merging in the glow of the ship's light. The crowd cheered, not with wild shouts, but with deep voices that carried respect. They knew they were witnessing history. They knew this story would travel through taverns, through ships, through entire star systems. The tale of a mechanic who gave away a meal and received a galaxy in return. Ethan's eyes lifted to the sky. For the first time in his life, he felt the stars calling not as unreachable lights, but as something within his grasp. And as he stood there, surrounded by people, by memories, and by the two sisters who carried his legacy, he realized something powerful. The galaxy did not belong only to emperors and armies. Sometimes, it belonged to those who chose kindness when no one else would. The off-Earth square was still buzzing with whispers. The crowd could not decide whether to kneel, to cheer, or to run. They had never seen power like this come to their broken colony. And now they watched, wide-eyed, as the sisters stood before Ethan, their words still hanging in the air like fire. The older sister turned, raising her hand. The ship behind her responded as if alive, its lights glowing brighter, its engines humming with energy. The ram stretched further, wider, as though inviting Ethan to step into another world. Gasps spread across the crowd. The ship itself seemed to bend to the will of the sisters. And Ethan stood at the center of it all, trembling, unsure if this was a dream or a cruel trick of fate. The younger sister looked at him, her eyes softer now. Ethan, she said gently, you gave us a chance to live. Now let us give you a chance to see the stars. Her voice carried warmth, but also power, a voice that could command soldiers yet still beg for trust. The older one stepped closer, her gaze sharp, but filled with respect. You spent your life fixing broken ships for men who never thanked you. Now we offer you a place where no one will forget your name. Come with us, Ethan. Step aboard and see the world your kindness built. The crowd gasped louder. Mothers clutched their children. All men shook their heads in disbelief. The poor mechanic, invited onto a ship of kings and conquerors. It was beyond imagination. Even Ethan himself felt his knees weaken, his mind racing with fear and wonder. He looked down at his hands, scarred and blackened from years of labor. Hands that had never touched wealth, never known comfort. He thought of his small bed, his broken tools, his cold nights. Could he really leave it all behind? And yet was there even a choice left? The younger sister reached for his hand. Her touch was steady, strong, nothing like the frightened child she once had been. Please, she whispered, you gave us a future. Let us give you one in return. The older one turned to the crowd, her voice carrying like thunder. This man is not just a mechanic. He is our savior, our teacher, our reason for fighting. You call him poor, but to us, he is greater than emperors. The crowd fell silent. Some bowed their heads, ashamed forever mocking him. Others looked at him with awe, as if seeing him for the first time. The weight of their stares pressed on Ethan, his chest tightening. He never wanted glory, never wanted worship, yet here it was, forced upon him like a crown he never asked to wear. The ship's interior glowed brighter, and for the first time Ethan saw, beyond the ramp, the inside was like nothing he had ever imagined. Walls of silver, smooth and alive with energy, strange symbols glowing softly, a corridor that seemed endless, leading deeper into a future he had never dared to dream. He could hear faint sounds, the voices of crew members speaking in tones of discipline and respect. He could feel the hum of power running through the floor, stronger than any ship he had ever touched. The younger sister smiled faintly. Inside waits everything you were denied here. Ethan, food, safety, respect, a place where no one goes hungry again. But more than that, inside waits a family, our family that remembers what you did when the galaxy forgot us. Ethan's throat tightened. For so long he had lived alone. No children, no wife, no one to carry his name. And now, two women who had once been helpless orphans looked at him as if he was their father. The weight of it broke something inside him. A man who had spent years in silence finally felt the tears flow freely down his face, but doubt still gnawed at him. He looked at the sisters and asked, his voice rough, "Why me? I am no leader, no warrior, no one important. Why bring your ship, your power, your future to me?" The older one did not hesitate. She stepped close, her voice strong enough to silence the entire colony. "Because without you, we would not exist. Because greatness is not born from crowns or armies, but from men who choose kindness. When they could choose nothing, you are the root of everything we have built, Ethan. And now it is time you see the tree your seed has grown into." The words struck him like thunder. His heart pounded, his knees weakened. The crowd stared, waiting, holding their breath. Would Ethan, the poor mechanic, step onto the ship? Would he accept the offer of the stars? The younger sister held out her hand once more, her eyes glistening. "Please," she whispered again. "Let us take you where you belong." Ethan looked from her hand to the ship, from the ship to the crowd. All his life had been spent in dirt and shadow, but now the future stood open before him. And though fear still burned in his chest, a stronger fire rose to meet it, the same fire that had made him give away his meal on that stormy night. The fire of choice. And as the colony held its breath, Ethan took one slow step toward the ramp, one step closer to the stars, one step into the destiny his kindness had created. Asterisk. The Legacythe colony held its breath as Ethan stepped forward. His boots touched the shining ramp, and for the first time in his life, he felt metal that was not rusted, not broken, not cheap. It vibrated beneath his feet, alive with power, alive with promise. The crowd whispered, their voices mixing into a single echo that seemed to rise with him. The poor mechanic was walking into the stars. The sisters walked at his side, one on the left, one on the right. They no longer looked like rulers towering over him. They looked like daughters guiding their father home. Their steps matched his, steady and proud. And behind them, The guards lowered their heads in silent respect. The ramp carried them higher. And when Ethan turned his head, he saw the colony below. For years he had walked those broken streets, carrying scraps of food, carrying tools, carrying silence. Now he saw the faces of people who once ignored him, who once laughed at his soft heart. They stood with tears in their eyes, some even kneeling. The man they had called a fool was leaving as a legend. The inside of the ship swallowed him in. Light. The corridor glowed like starlight captured in glass. The air was warm, rich with the scent of clean energy and food beyond imagining. Crew members stood in rows, their uniforms perfect. Their eyes locked on him, and then, as one, they saluted not to the sisters, but to Ethan. The poor mechanic felt his chest tighten, his breath stolen away. Never in his life had anyone honored him like this. The younger sister smiled, her eyes soft with pride. They know your name, Ethan. They know your story. Across fleets and stations, across systems and colonies, they whisper about the man who gave us hope. The older one placed her hand on his shoulder, her voice steady as steel. You thought your life was small, but the galaxy has carried your kindness farther than you can imagine. You are part of every battle we won, every life we saved, every star we now call free. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. His heart, once heavy with loneliness, now felt alive with a warmth greater than fire. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a shadow. He felt seen. He felt remembered. He felt human. The ship's engines rumbled, a sound deep and powerful. The colony shook as dust rose into the air. People cried out in awe, shielding their eyes as the vessel lifted. Children waved. Men shouted. Women pressed hands to their hearts. And through it all, Ethan looked down one last time at the world he had once called home. It was broken, yes, but tonight it had witnessed something greater than kings or empires. The sisters stood beside him as the ship pierced the clouds. The world below vanished, swallowed by darkness and distance. Ahead, the stars opened wide, endless and waiting. Ethan had spent his life staring at them from the ground. Now they were no longer far, no longer unreachable. Now they were his. He whispered softly, almost to himself, one meal. Just one meal changed all this. The sisters heard him, and they both smiled. The younger one's voice was gentle. It was never just a meal, Ethan. It was the choice to care when no one else would. The older one added firmly, and choices like that are what change the galaxy. The ship soared forward, engines humming like a heartbeat. The crew moved with discipline, carrying out orders. But their eyes still followed Ethan. To them, he was not a stranger, not a mechanic. He was a living legend. The man who had proven that kindness could ignite revolutions. Ethan sat slowly in a chair at the center of the bridge. It was soft, warm. Nothing like the cold metal he was used to. For a moment, he felt unworthy. But the sisters stood behind him. They placed their hands on his shoulders, grounding him, lifting him, and for the first time in his life, Ethan allowed himself to believe he was exactly where he belonged. The stars stretched before him, endless rivers of light across the black sea of space, and as the ship carried him forward, a truth settled in his heart. The galaxy did not belong only to the powerful, to the cruel, to the rich. It belonged to those who chose kindness, even when kindness cost them everything. And that truth, born in the hands of a poor mechanic, would outlive empires. The legend of Ethan spread quickly, carried by every witness in the colony. They told it in taverns, they told it in markets, they told it across star systems. The man who fed to orphans and was carried to the stars. And those stories grow with time. One thing remained true, that a simple act, done in the dark of a storm, had lit a fire brighter than suns. Ethan looked once more at the sisters. They were no longer hungry children. They were leaders, warriors, visionaries. But to him, they would always be the girls who held each other in the rain. And as they smiled back at him, their eyes filled with both power and gratitude. He understood something deeper. He had not just saved them, they had saved him too. The ship broke into the void, leaving behind the broken colony. Ahead lay new worlds, new battles, new stories. But for Ethan, the poor mechanic who gave away a meal, one truth would always remain. The smallest kindness can echo across the stars, and in that echo, humanity's legacy would live forever.